Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Travel. My name is Gary Arndt, fresh off my 12,000-mile road trip through western United States and Canada, finally be able to sit in one spot for a while. Joining me, as usual, is the man so nice they named him twice. He's the genius and the creative mind behind Blogger Bridge and the Amateur Traveler podcast, Mr. Chris Christensen. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I see you used that 12,000 miles, the time there well, thinking of all these. So.
Oh, I got enough for another couple weeks. Definitely. And that voice you hear in the background, proud new dog owner, Jen Leo.
Good morning, everybody. Jen? I'm doing great. We might hear some coughing, some chinkling of his collar, and if you need me to put me on mute, just do this. So for those listeners, I said pointed to my nose and then pointed at me.
And where is the dog in the housebreaking stage?
He was doing good, but today he had some accidents. Here he is. Meet Cooper. Cooper, say hi to everybody. Exactly. Bad time of the day for me to be doing this.
I think you also need to get him podcast trained.
Yeah. I can't even get him phone trained. If I try and take a picture in front of him, he gets all upset.
And joining us back again on the show, I think this is third time on the show, maybe?
That sounds right.
Coming to us, I'm assuming from Mexico, Mr. Tim Leffel.
Hi, everybody.
He is award-winning writer, blogger, author, raconteur, bon vivant, expat. I'm sure there's a couple other adjectives we could find.
Okay, you don't even know what half those words mean, Gary.
No, but they sound impressive. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. Good to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Where are you exactly?
I am in my home office in Guanajuato, Mexico, and it's a beautiful sunny day.
Excellent. So let's go through a couple of news stories that happened this week. I think the biggest story this week was the whole kerfuffle about the Knee Defender. And I think we actually talked about Knee Defender a while back.
We did, yeah.
Yeah, it's a small product that basically you can jam in the table that comes down on your seat to prevent the person in front of you from leaning their seat back. And there was a United flight where somebody was doing this. The person in front couldn't lean their seat back, and they kind of got into a big argument. They diverted the flight, kicked the two people off, and then continued. And since then, I think the big discussion is, one, is it legitimate to use the Knee Defender? And two, do you have a right to recline your seat? So, Chris, are you pro or anti-Knee Defender?
Well, I am anti-Knee Defender for United Airlines and every other major airline in the U.S. that lets you recline your seat. They don't allow you to use the Knee Defender, and they will confiscate it. And United was very clear, and they asked the guy. The flight attendant came over and said, you can't use the Knee Defender, and he refused to not use it. So, okay, yeah, I think it's... no, actually, the other interesting thing, I had a comment, so... For some reason this week, I had this spike in traffic on the site, and I found out it was all about the Knee Defender. It was basically people coming to an old article I wrote. But the most insightful comment was this one. It's from a captain. He says, what the average passenger fails to take into account is that the FAA's requirements on dealing with inoperable components on board aircraft. Any item that fails to operate properly must be addressed, or the aircraft is being operated illegally. The airline and the captain can be held accountable. The ultimate price would be the captain losing his pilot's license. And if you think I'm going to risk everything because of your self-centered approach to life, that is not going to happen. So I specifically informed my flight attendants, if they see this device in use, they are to have it removed. I hope that clears up any confusion.
Jen, do you recline your seat when you're on a flight?
I would say 15 to 20% of the time. I try really hard not to, but the times in which I do is when the person in front of me has reclined theirs, and then I look behind me and I usually assess the situation. If it's somebody big and there's no room, I won't do it. If there's a kid behind me or an empty seat, then I will do it. But you know what? I like what Johnny Jet did. Johnny Jet was handing out prepaid go-go in-flight cards
right.
to the people in front of him and saying, hey, I'll give you this go-go in-flight card for some free Wi-Fi if you don't recline your seat. And I thought that was a really great approach.
There you go. It's all about the incentives.
Tim,
I think
are you a recliner?
It depends. Like Jen said, it's kind of a game of dominoes. Once the first one falls, the rest fall. So if the person in front of me leans back, then I usually do too. But I try to do it slowly and give the person behind me a heads up, because I've had my laptop screen whacked about 20 times, and that's really annoying when somebody reclines really quickly and you don't know they're going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as this article said, Spirit and Allegiant have solved the problem by just not letting them recline, and I guess that gets rid of that. But
and we should say they have no policy against the knee defender. Then
yeah, they don't have to have a policy. To me, it kind of depends on how long the flight is, though. I'm on a lot of those little 45-minute, 1-hour things on those commuter jets that are already cramped, and I kind of feel bad leaning it back on those. But if you're going across an ocean for 8 hours, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Well,
did you notice they were in the Economy Plus too? They had the 4 or 5 extra inches of legroom in the particular seats that they were fighting about.
Well, what do you think should be the policy? I mean, if you were given control of the FAA for a week, and let's just talk about domestic flights, not like flights where you have to sleep on the plane. Do you think seats should recline? Would we be better off if we all just didn't recline our seats?
Personally, with the design of an airline seat right now and being 6'3", the way an airline seat is made, I'm hunched over, and so it's helpful to be able to recline it a little bit.
Jen, you're not a recliner. Would you think that the airlines like Spirit are right in not letting their seats recline? Just getting rid of the whole problem?
Does Spirit not let their seats recline, or do they just want to charge more if you do?
That would be very, very Spirit. But no, they don't let their seats recline. They also have a very small seat pitch. The area between their seat, your seat, and the seat in front of you is one of the smallest, as I recall.
I think if an airline is going to be doing that plane wide, I think that's fine, because if Spirit says we're not going to recline our seats at all, I think then somebody like Chris can say, okay, that's not the right airline for me. Just like for me, I wouldn't want to fly Spirit if I absolutely could avoid it because of the baggage restrictions, or the payment, or the fees just drive me nuts, or whatever it is. But I think if you know in advance, and that's just how it is, I think people can learn to live with it. But I only need it if I'm trying to sleep. And so if that's just a short domestic flight up and down the West Coast or halfway across the country, I'm probably not trying to sleep.
Yeah, I think it's the most that Spirit flies is Colombia, maybe Peru. So it's not like you're on there for 8 or 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not a big recliner. I always feel bad about it. I hate it when the person in front of me reclines. And, to the tall people like Chris, I just say you shouldn't have decided to be that tall.
That's interesting what they said.
I mean, that was really an option. So.
Yeah.
It's interesting what that captain said about the inoperable parts, though, because how many times have you been on a flight where the seat was broken, and didn't recline?
Right.
Hey, Chris, what have you noticed any domestic airlines that are comfortable for you, like noticeably comfortable?
Well, one of the reasons I've been flying JetBlue and Virgin America more is they've got a little better seat pitch, a little better seat. And then I loved, when I was flying United, I loved that seat that they were fighting about, the Economy Plus, but I won't pay extra for it. For me, I have to get upgrade by having status, but I don't have status on anything right now. I'm just flying too many different airlines.
Well, let's move to, I thought this was also a neat story. This comes from petapixel.com. One of the most iconic images of Copenhagen is the Little Mermaid statue. In fact, they've taken this statue to World Expos, different parts of the world, just because it's such an iconic image. But in reality, you can't publish a photo of the Little Mermaid statue. If you do, if you put it in a magazine or something, it's copyrighted, and you will actually end up getting a substantial invoice for it. And if you go to Flickr or do a search for it online, there are, of course, thousands and thousands of photos of this statue. Do you think it's right that you can copyright something which is such an iconic image and something which is out in the public sphere?
I think if you're going to do that, you need to put right over the statue, just put a big sticker on it that says at least that it's copyrighted so people know. So. With, say, Eiffel Tower, you can't take a picture of the Eiffel Tower when it is illuminated because that is also copyrighted.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Think about how many pictures people have of those.
Well, think about how many pictures people have that it's illuminated and it's just in the background of their photo. That's technically illegal.
That's ridiculous. Like one of those Paris hotel suites where it's outside the window, It seems to me any public sculpture is fair game. I mean, don't put it in public if you don't want anybody to take a photo of it. Put it in a museum.
Does anyone know if the laws in the United States are the same as they are in Europe regarding this?
I think it is possible to have something copyrighted that it is a structure, but I can't. We had this conversation at a Travel Massive meetup earlier this week, and I couldn't come up with any examples of a structure that was copywritten in the U.S. I was trying to think of whether the Guggenheim or the Gateway Arch or something was, and I couldn't remember anything that was.
Yeah, the St. Louis Arch is publicly owned. That's a federally owned structure. I think like the Bean statue in Chicago is also publicly owned.
Right, Cloudgate.
I'm just trying to think of what. There might be things like if you go to the Getty Museum, they may have public, once you're on their grounds. But even then, I don't think that they have any restrictions on photography. Well, if anyone's listening and you know of copyrighted things in the U.S. that you can't take pictures of, let us know, because I'm kind of curious about it. I mean, my attitude is pretty much the same as Tim's. It's ridiculous. If you don't want something to be photographed, don't put it out in public.
So a quick perusal of the Wikipedia article on copyright and architecture in the United States gives me the impression that it is possible to do, but I'm not seeing a list of anything that is.
Seems like a lost cause anyway. What happens when everybody has Google Glass and they start doing live feeds?
Right. Well, and we saw that with, one of the things I think of is the number of places that said, used to have rules, you had to pay this much for a camera pass and you had to pay this much for a video pass, and then people start walking in with their cell phones that do cameras, and then a year or two later people start walking in with their cell phones that do really good video. The laws just have a trouble keeping up with the technology, and we've seen that in so many different places.
Want to hear a really good story about that? So last couple days ago, I'm on a project where I'm trying to photograph all the national parks in North America. And usually it's not a problem. You just go to the park, take pictures. But I was visiting Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota, and they do not let you bring in tripods. If you bring in a tripod, then you have to pay a $50 media fee or something, and then you also have to have a ranger with you, and that was an extra $100. So I'm like, all right, I really want to do this, and I've tried photographing Wind Cave before without a tripod. It was a disaster. So I pay the fee, I show up after hours, ranger takes me through, I take a bunch of photos, everything's great, and for the first and only time since I have been, using my camera, somehow the settings got changed.
Oh no.
And it was shooting in JPEG, which I have never, ever, ever had this problem before. It only happened somehow when I was inside the cave. And it was also in full automatic, and I was wondering why I wasn't able to change the aperture and other stuff. So, yeah. So we'll see how those turned out. I haven't even looked at it yet.
How much was the fee?
I ended up paying around $140 for everything.
Wow, that's significant.
But the thing is, it was like there's 2 parks in the U.S. park system where they have that rule, Wind Cave and Mammoth Cave. Because the only way to get it, and it's not an issue of the cave, it's because the only way to visit the cave is on a guided tour.
Right.
And they don't want people with tripods on a guided tour. Whereas in Carlsbad Cavern, there are no guided tours. It's self-guided. So they don't have a problem if you bring in a tripod.
Well, especially in the dark, I'm sure they're worried about somebody tripping over a tripod, because that is a very dark. I was just in Mammoth Cave, so it's a very dark environment.
Not really my favorite cave, to be honest. It's big.
Which one? Mammoth Cave?
Mammoth, yeah, but it's not
big, yeah, but
pretty.
it's not that interesting from no stalactites and stalagmites to speak of.
Exactly.
Stalac.
We got Tim here. This is your second or third time on the show. We should probably research that. And you've got a brand new book out about living abroad cheaply. Want to tell us a bit about that? Because I know that your previous book, Your Cheapest Destinations, that's been through a couple of different iterations now. What's the new book about, and how is it different?
Yeah, the other one's
Tim, first let's get the title right. Tim, tell us the title.
It's a better life for half the price, and the subtitle is How to Prosper on Less Money in the Cheapest Places to Live. And yeah, I've done the world's cheapest destinations book since late 2002, early 2003. It's in its 4th edition now, and I've had a blog all that time as well, the cheapest destinations blog that has been going strong all that time. Every year, almost, I've done a post on the cheapest places to live in the world rather than travel, which is what the book's been about. And invariably, that's the most popular post all year long. And so they always say to listen to your audience, and I finally went, well, duh, I guess I should be writing about that more. So I did a lot of research for this book, worked on it about a year, and interviewed a lot of expats living abroad. And of course, I've been here in Mexico for the second time now for a year, and know a lot of people that are living here. But I interviewed singles in Thailand, families in Portugal and Argentina, people living in Bulgaria, and all kinds of bargain spots around the globe. And the one connecting thing for all of them was they're spending half or less what they were living in the U.S. or Canada or England or Australia.
So what are the top destinations? Because the strategy can obviously backfire massively if you go to Switzerland or Norway.
Exactly.
So what are the destinations?
He has 17, Gary. He has 17 destinations included.
So what are some of the destinations? I'm assuming Mexico is one of them because you're there.
Yeah, it's kind of dependent on where you're coming from, because a lot of Americans and Canadians are in Latin America, and then a lot of Brits are in places like Bulgaria and Romania and Portugal, so that drives a lot of it. And then, of course, a lot of Australians end up going to Thailand or Indonesia or Malaysia, one of those places. But you know, apart from that, I mean, for us, if you want to just go for the cheapest place to live, and that's your main criteria, in this part of the world, it would probably be Nicaragua, and Ecuador is a pretty close second. And there are loads of people living in both those places for, you know, $800, $1,000 a month as a single, and not much more for a couple, and living really well. And so, you know, if you're somebody who's retired and you're on 1 or 2 Social Security checks, you know, you're pretty much in poverty if you're in the U.S., but you can move to one of these places and actually go out to eat all the time and live in a nice place, and, you know, travel around the country and have a pretty good life. So that drives a lot of it for a lot of people. And then some people are doing it for weather too. I mean, it's a whole lot nicer to live in you know, Panama in the winter than it is to live in northern Michigan, or where Gary just was, up in Nowheresville, Canada. So it depends on what's driving you. But where I am, it's at 6,000 feet, 6,500 feet, so it's kind of like spring all year, and some people really are after that as well.
Hey, Tim, one of the things that I really liked about your book is you described 2 different types of travelers. the Chains couple and the Wings couple. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that really broadened who can read your book. It's not like this book is just for a digital nomad. I think a couple could, entering into retirement, could really consider this. And having those two descriptions of the different types of people really brought home a lot of personality types and what kind of things that you're going to encounter. I thought it was a really good heads up.
Yeah, well, thanks. I think there's a lot of people that this book is not for. It's not for everyone. There's some people who are really tied to their community and really tied to their stuff. They really like having the huge house with the two-car garage and 2 more cars sitting outside of it and all the gadgets, and they're not going to leave, and that's fine. If they want to live a better life for half the price, they're going to have to seriously just cut down on what they spend or sell half their stuff or something. But a lot of people are discovering in retirement. There was actually a New York Times article about it the other day, about how a lot of retirees are realizing they don't need all that stuff and they don't need all that space, so they're either selling it or they're putting it in storage, and they're saying adios to all their relatives and taking off. And the reality is a lot of them don't see their relatives that often anyway, and so if you just tack on an extra 2 hours to your commute to go see them, your plane ride, it's not that big a deal. But you do kind of have to be the kind of person that's willing to let go of what you've known and what you've lived before and kind of take a leap of faith, because even if you do a lot of research and do a trial run for where you're going to live, you're still going to have some uncertainties and some big adjustments to make and that kind of thing. And some people just are not cut out for making those adjustments.
How did your family do those adjustments when you moved down to Mexico? Did you do a trial run first?
We did, actually. We did a month in the city a year before we ever moved here, and rented an apartment in a real neighborhood, and took Spanish lessons each day and each weekday, and went shopping at the local markets, and went to get things fixed at a tailor and all this kind of things you got to deal with when you move. There's more of them when you move for good, of course, dealing with electric bills and things like that. But I think that's a really good strategy. We travel all the time, and I think you guys are probably the same. You're always thinking, wow, could I live in this place? Maybe this is nice. But when you actually do live there, it's a whole different story. And you need to kind of get a sense of that before you move to Playa del Carmen because you had a great time at a all-inclusive resort for a week. It's not quite the same when you get an apartment there.
Now, do you recommend that people, when they're making this move, do you recommend that they buy the house that they're living in or rent, or is that different from country to country?
It's almost always better to rent first because, I kind of blame it on that House Hunters International show. They make it look so easy that people just swoop in for a weekend and look at 3 houses and they go, woo, I'm done. I found my place. And, that works sometimes, but far more often it doesn't because you end up having an auto body shop move in next to you, or a disco, or you find out you're in a high crime neighborhood and you didn't know it, and you've got like the most expensive house in the neighborhood. It's always better to get a lay of the land first, and a lot of people overpay that way too because they don't really know what the local market's like. They haven't talked to enough people who live there to see what prices are really like if you buy from a local. And so I think it's always better to rent first and take your time to look around.
The problem that I see.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gary. I say the problem that I see is that you talk about when you're traveling around and you say, gee, I could really live here. My wife and I never say that at the same place.
Yeah.
So we're in Zurich and she sees the trains running on time and the city clean and how efficient it is, and she thinks these are my people, and I get to Nice and see the little more chaotic and and I think hey, I could picture living here. So I don't know how you work that out if you're traveling as a couple.
Yeah, it is hard. It's something you got to hash out and really figure out what's going to work for both because and then if you have a family in the mix, that makes it even harder because then you got to look at what's going to work for your kids as far as schooling or for instance, we really thought hard about living in Buenos Aires for a while. We really loved the city, and thought it would be a great place to live. But nobody eats dinner until 11 o'clock at night, and and it's a big chaotic city, so maybe not the best place to raise a kid. It's kind of like living in Manhattan, and so that was one of the reasons we picked a smaller city that was easier to navigate. And once we figured out there was a school she could go to that would work, we settled on this. But it is something you got to really spend a lot of time discussing, because a lot of couples have very different ideas about what the favorite place, what the ideal place is, even something as simple as weather, or how much you're walking as opposed to driving, and things like that.
And did you take into consideration how many times you might want to travel back to the United States throughout the year? Like, say you needed to come home to see the grandparents at Christmas time, or anything like that.
Yeah, that was a big consideration from us, and we're about a half an hour from an airport where Delta, United, and American all fly into, plus Aeromexico. So for us, that was a big part of it, both for my job and for getting home to see people. We both have elderly parents that we need to get back to see now and then. And I think that is why a lot of Americans are in Mexico, and Canadians. It is a great country with fantastic food and good weather and all that, but it's also really accessible, and you can say the same for Belize and Honduras and Guatemala and a whole lot of places that are close by. Whereas if you're deciding you're going to pick up and move to Thailand, that's not so easy if you want to get back on a regular basis. And it's also not easy to run a business. Back to that digital nomad thing, if all your clients are in the US or Canada and you're living in Vietnam, 12 hours difference, you're really going to have to get your body clock adjusted to some strange call times.
Tim, what I was going to ask is, on your list of places, there are some cheap places that are not on that list. So, like, Sierra Leone is not on the list. Clearly, it's not just a matter of affordability. I know when I'm traveling, I'm always looking for places where I could spend extended periods of time, and I always have sort of three things. It's affordability, weather, and connectivity / development. So it needs to have good bandwidth and a reasonably good infrastructure. Are those kind of the criteria you're using in listing these places?
Yeah, it is, and actually some of them I featured. Even I said you got to really work on this internet thing, because it's not automatic that you're going to have good connectivity. You got to move into a place that has it, or you've got to have a USB stick or whatever as a backup, and that's a real problem in India and Nepal, which I have in this book. And if you're somebody who needs to be online 10 hours a day doing stock trading or heavy graphic stuff, lots of areas in those countries are not going to be good places to live. And that's true for a lot of Africa too. And I'm probably going to get some hate mail later, because I sort of wrote off Africa in general and said unless you want to move to Morocco or somewhere like that, it's either not going to be cheap or you're not going to have good infrastructure and good connectivity. And even a place like Bali, it can be kind of hit and miss depending on where you are. So that's definitely something to look into. And one thing I keep advising in the book is find a local message board where lots of other expats hang out that are already there, because they'll bitch and moan all day about whatever's going wrong. So you can go on and find out what the problems are pretty quick.
I spent quite a bit of time this year in South Africa, and I found especially that the rand has kind of been falling. Durban and Cape Town have both become rather affordable. Cape Town is probably the most expensive part in South Africa, but it's still affordable in terms of what you're going to spend in the United States or Canada, I think. And I've actually found several places where the bandwidth was actually quite good, into the tens of megabits per second download speed.
Yeah, I think a lot of it in South Africa depends on that exchange rate, because and it bounces around a lot. A lot of expats I've talked to who have lived there have said, oh, it used to be cheap and now it's not, or if you catch them at a different time, it'll be the opposite. So it's a hard one to judge, and it is a bit more expensive for housing there if you're living in an area you want to live in.
Well, I mean, expensive for housing. You talk about saving half as much. I live in Silicon Valley, and I could save more than half as much by moving to Hortonville, Wisconsin, with Gary there. or lots of other places. We watch. My wife loves the Property Brothers show, and they're always out shopping for houses or something. And I saw them looking for houses for $70,000, the other day, and I'm thinking, this is either a really old episode, or let's go buy a dozen. It's.
Yeah, I did make the point in this book that you kind of have to compare apples to apples. I mean, if you're coming from Silicon Valley, you can live for half price almost anywhere, even parts of Western Europe. But if you're coming from Ames, Iowa or something like that, then it's a whole different story. So you kind of have to at least go city to city, if nothing else, or rural to rural, because it's not quite fair to say, oh, I live in Iowa and Buenos Aires is not half the price of that. And yeah, well, maybe not, but if you're coming from a big city in the U.S. or England, it definitely is.
Tim, are there any places that you think maybe didn't make the cut for this book, but in 5 years you think could be a potential place for people to look at? Either they're developing or they're just kind of an up-and-coming destination?
Yeah, I'm already starting to get some emails from people about, why didn't you put Albania in there and things like that. And a lot of places I just couldn't find many people that lived there, and so I couldn't find somebody to interview to really get the lowdown. So I imagine when I do this again, it'll be a bit longer and have some more countries. But also, back to your point about the 3 criteria, I don't want to put a place in there just because it's cheap. I mean, there's some, really bargain price places around the world where hardly any expats live because they're just kind of boring, or there's not much to do there, or it's just not much of a community. There's not anything to latch on to. So I kind of want to balance that out with what's affordable, but also when you've lived there for 2 years, you still love it, and I think it's a great place. And there's kind of a little bit of a domino effect. Like once there's a group of expats in a place, then more of them come because more people start telling their friends about it, and the word of mouth is hugely important. But I don't know how many expats are living in Paraguay or some places like that are real bargains, or there's some old Russian satellite countries that are probably quite cheap, but they're kind of bleak places to live.
One of my predictions, I think, it's not at that point yet, but I could see within 5 years there being enough, infrastructure for people to, get an apartment maybe, would be Burma.
Yeah.
It's cheap. It has the weather is nice, same as Thailand basically, but the infrastructure just isn't there for obvious reasons. And I think that you're going to see it probably in a couple concentrated places at first, where they'll probably have string some fiber or something maybe into the capital. But I could definitely see that becoming something in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't have Laos in here, and I would like to add that next time around, but it was the same thing. I couldn't find people that had spent more than like 3 or 4 months there. And a part of it's that connectivity thing again. It's hard to find good internet and run a business from there.
So since we keep talking about all these different countries, I'm just going to read down the list. So which ones you do have covered in the book. We've got Mexico, Ecuador, Panama, Thailand, Cambodia, Colombia, Vietnam, Argentina, Nicaragua, Honduras, Hungary, Guatemala, India, Bulgaria, Portugal, Malaysia, and Nepal.
I intentionally didn't put those in any order, by the way. You can probably tell.
I think Nepal is the only landlocked country on that list. All the rest have some sort of coast.
And I didn't put Bolivia because it's really a royal pain to get a visa there to live, and they're kind of anti-American. And but that's landlocked and very cheap. But yeah, you're right. I hadn't noticed that.
So, Tim, tell us a little bit about, this is a really interesting chapter. What's cheaper and what's not when you move abroad? Do you have some quick tips from that chapter?
Yeah, sure. The things Americans especially can really see a huge savings in are housing and healthcare. You know, healthcare is not such a big deal if you're from England or Canada, maybe, but it's a massive deal if you're from the U.S. I mean, it's not unusual for self-employed people to be spending 20% of their income on healthcare in the U.S. these days, and so most of these places it's cheap enough that you can pay out of pocket, or you can get an insurance policy for $100 a month or something, and that's a big one. Housing's a big one, and housing's really easy to figure out once you start seeing what other people are spending. But what's not cheap is usually electronics, and almost in every country in this book, that's the thing people complained about when I asked them, what's not cheap where you are, and pretty much across the board, people said you should buy your electronics when you're in the U.S. There's a few exceptions like Panama where they're pretty much a duty-free country, and so everything's pretty similar to the price you would pay in the U.S. But you guys probably know even people from Europe come to the U.S. to go shopping for electronics, which is kind of nuts. So that's usually more, and a lot of places don't have a free trade agreement with China like we do. So here in Mexico, for instance, everything that's Chinese is at least 20% more. So that applies to electronics, but it also applies to clothing and toys and things like that. So in general, imported goods are going to cost you more in a lot of cases than you would pay at home. So you can't just assume that everything's going to be cheaper.
What about bandwidth? What are the best countries, affordable countries that you've seen as far as having a decent internet connection? Or maybe it's not even the whole country. Perhaps it's just a city or a part of the country.
Yeah, it's really odd. It depends a lot on where you are, and it's not the places you would expect necessarily. Like, I think one of the highest is Romania, actually, for some odd reason, where you can get like 100 megabytes per second if you're in the right place. And some of the countries in Asia are quite good, if you have the right connection. I mean, Bangkok and Chiang Mai can be quite good if you've got a good connection, but if you don't, then you might have a lousy one. And Panama is really good. They have excellent internet connectivity, but there are places like Nicaragua where they just never had good landlines, and they've just completely bypassed it. A lot of Africa is like that too, where everything is pretty much cellular. So if you have good antenna near you, then you're in great shape. But if you don't, then you're in trouble. And so a lot of rural areas, especially, you can't get good bandwidth. And so there are a lot of beautiful places to live where you're kind of isolated. And so that's something you really got to check up on. But in general, if you're in a big city, you'll be okay. But if you're in a small town, it can be real hit and miss. Mexico's not too great either, by the way. I mean, I've got 5 megabits per second, and I can't really get any better than that. If I lived smack in the center, I might be able to get 10. But if you're in Mexico City, you can get a lot better than that through cable. But I just don't have that option where I live. It's kind of a monopoly here, as you guys might know. It's the richest or second richest man in the world runs everything as far as telecom goes, and he's got a lock on it.
Carlos Slim needs his golden back scratcher.
That's Telefónica de Mexico.
Yeah, he owns Telcel and the landline company as well.
So how long do you plan on staying in Mexico?
I'm going to be here for another year, and then I'm going to go back to the U.S., back to Tampa. And the reason is because I have a daughter who's about to turn 14, and she's going to finish high school in the U.S. If I didn't have that factor in the mix, we'd probably stay here. We own our house, and it's a lot bigger and nicer than what I'm going to be able to rent in the U.S. for double the price. So I like it here and would stay, but for my daughter's schooling, it's going to be much easier if she goes back because it's academically not as challenging here. I think that's kind of offset by the fact that she talks like a Mexican in Spanish, and she's really fluent, and that'll help her out in life, I'm sure. But I think if she's going to go on to college, she needs to be back in a good school system.
Tim, what has been your daughter's biggest challenges living abroad? I mean, has she complained at all about missing her friends, or has she jumped into any organized sports, or what's her daily life like?
Like a lot of teenagers, she spends a lot of time farting around on YouTube and Facebook, so it's kind of an isolationist thing in that sense. But she does get invited to a lot of things by her friends and does a lot of things with them, parties and birthdays and all that kind of stuff. And I got to say, that adjustment has been pretty easy. Like making friends and the social life part was a lot easier than I kind of expected, and they're very gracious here and not so cliquey, and so some other girls kind of took her in immediately and made her really feel at home both times we were here. So that's been really good, and what she complains about is really kind of trivial stuff about missing American TV and American food in the mall, and Hot Topic and Claire's and that kind of thing.
That's
so
the same stuff
not
that
really
Claire complains
Claire's.
about. Yeah.
She manages, but the first time was harder because we uprooted her from Nashville, where we had lived her whole life, and sold our house and brought her here and didn't come back to Nashville, so that was kind of traumatic.
So why Florida then? Why are you going back to Florida?
My mother-in-law lives there, so if my wife and I want to go away on a trip together, which we did last year, we did a bike trip in Portugal together for 9 days. So we were able to have her come in and stay at our house and take our daughter to school, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
All right, any more before we move on to our picks of the week?
Well, I just love this topic. I'm not quite ready to leave it. Chris, have you thought at all about doing something like this, like what Tim's been doing?
Well, I have, just because I'm a decade closer to retirement age than you are. I mean, I'm not there yet, but I don't honestly know that I want to be an expat, that I really want to move offshore. As much as I love traveling and as much as I love visiting places and would talk about it, I think I am one of those people who has deeper roots. I miss the volunteering I do here, the community of friends that we have when I'm gone. So, even Gary's 79-day road trip, I think, I don't know that I want to be gone that long. 5 weeks away that I just was felt like a long time. So.
I do want to say, for the record, though, a lot of people go away for 3 months and then come back, and they do that every year, and that's fine. Sometimes they go to a different place.
Yeah, that actually sounds.
That sounds appealing.
I'd love to do that.
And then they do a home exchange, or they rent their house out through Airbnb while they're gone, and that kind of offsets the cost part if you still have a mortgage.
Right.
I would love to see this. Coming from Southern California. I know it kind of takes the travel aspect out of it, but in terms of better life for half the price, I would love to see what domestic options we have. Like, say we don't want to go abroad, but we do want to downgrade in the U.S. I mean, leaving California, you can go almost anywhere and it's half the price. But I would love to.
You
I would love
go
to see
places in California that are half the price. The part of the problem as a traveler is, what you're moving away from. You're moving away from the city. You're moving away from access to an airport. You're moving away from access to culture. And my wife's three criteria of where she can live, and this is why we're having trouble thinking about a place offshore, is she has to be near a beach. She has to be near a major city where there is cultural activities, and she has to be near a National League team. So, at that point, that third one really limits us a lot.
Chris, I think she'd love Carlsbad.
Well, you see, San Diego is one of the few cities that's really in the run. Once you realize that you just have to eliminate Florida because it is Florida, so
But from San Diego, there are so many little beach towns up and down the coast, and you're still within an hour each way of airports. You really have your pick of beach towns around here.
I'm just not sure the way the Padres are playing that it really makes it in the run.
No, but we do get the Giants, so the Giants will come here.
Yes.
Jen, back to your point, there's always some rundown every year that U.S. News and World Report does. I think Kiplinger's does one that has like the coolest small towns in America, or things like that. There are a lot of places in the U.S.
Most cities, exactly.
Yeah, a lot of college towns, because then there's still culture.
Fort Collins, for instance, keeps making the list, and it's really funny because we have friends who live there, but it's never. And I've gone to business there a lot when I was with HP. But it's never been one of those places I said, well, I've got to live in Fort Collins. Even though my I have deep roots in Colorado. My family moved to Colorado in the 1800s. So.
All right. Any more on the subject? Jen?
You ready for my tip, Gary?
If you got one, sure, we can go there now.
Okay, so on this theme, I have mentioned this site before, but not in probably a year or 2 or 3. So on this subject, after you have bought and read Tim's book and his other books, if you want to keep thinking about this topic, I also really like the website priceoftravel.com. Priceoftravel.com, and you could just read about the topic and where, let's say that I'm just looking at the homepage now, the 13 cheapest Caribbean islands in 2014 for all-inclusive resorts. 15 European cities by price. They do a European backpacker index every year. So they really talk about price in depth on various subjects. So go to priceoftravel.com after this if you're interested in digging in deeper.
I do like that site, and I used it some for research. And there's another one called numbeo.com, Numbeo, and it shows how expensive a place is in comparison to New York City. Like New York City's 100, so maybe Sofia is 40, and it also breaks it down by housing and food and all kinds of other things. It's user generated, so some places have more data than others, but it's pretty good.
When my daughter decided to study abroad, she studied abroad in Geneva, which is the only city I think that makes you wonder why they made New York City 100. So, because I think that's supposed to be the most expensive city to live in.
Yeah, some places do come in over 100.
I got a great pick this week. It's something I've been wanting to do in the past. One of the biggest, Russian roulette type things I deal with when I travel is the Wi-Fi speeds of a hotel.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes it can be great, sometimes it can stink. And I've always been saying somebody should come out with a website that lets you search hotels by Wi-Fi speed. Mm-hmm. And someone has finally done it. HotelWiFiTest.com lets you not only search for hotels by Wi-Fi speeds, but lets you run a speed test once you get in a hotel. And I've been doing this all over my road trip. And you literally say, I'm at this hotel, I'm in this room, because you can often get different speeds in different rooms based on the interference of the Wi-Fi signal, and lets you search. So, for example, if you go
how about
and look
time
at
day, Gary, since it is often really much worse in the evenings, for instance.
What it does is I think it just averages it over everybody using it. Okay. So if most people are using it at night, then it's going to reflect that. Mm. But in New York City, for example, the best bandwidth is at the Da Vinci Hotel near Rockefeller Center. Hmm. And they have a download speed of 53.1 megabits per second, which is not too shabby. And as you go further down, you'll notice that there are a lot of places that maybe kind of name recognition. For example, the Courtyard Marriott in Manhattan, their download speed is less than a meg. Holiday Inn Express, less than a meg.
Wow.
So you can actually see what is good and what sucks, and especially if you're going to a big city, I think it's something you might want to take a look at before you book a room. And
I'm also surprised
really wish
how often it's inverse with how much you pay. How many of the less expensive hotels quite often can have better internet, and then you're staying in the more expensive hotel, they're charging you extra for the internet, and then it's bad.
I've said for a long time I would have no problem paying for internet if it was good. Right. But the problem is it isn't usually very good, and that's the thing. But I wish that this website would get purchased by one of the major hotel booking sites like Hotels.com, and they actually integrated this into their search results such that you could use this as a criteria, that I want to find hotels with bandwidth, say, above 10 megabits per second, which I think is kind of the threshold for doing a Google Hangout like we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. And it would solve just so many problems for me, and I think there's quite a few people that would actually use this as a criteria for finding hotels. And if more money was going towards the hotels that had good internet, then more hotels, I think, would get good internet.
Yeah, when
Anyways,
I'm traveling
hotel
and trying
Wi-Fi
to
test.
upload my pictures, from the road, you have some hotels where you can get completely caught up, and other ones where you might get one photo uploaded, literally, and you're letting the computer run overnight.
I've done that. I've been that guy, Chris.
So frustrating. I've got a choice. I don't know if we've talked about this one, and it's kind of a bizarre. It's more of it's not necessarily a practical tool for travel. It's more for travel wonks like me. Have you been to planefinder.net? Nope. If you go to planefinder.net, you can actually get a real-time display of where all the planes are in your area. So if you have a plane fly overhead, you can see who that is. But it's just fascinating to me that this information just exists and is out in the public domain. It's not at all a useful site, at least in any way that I can figure out. It's really just it's another way. If you're tired of spending all your time on YouTube and you're a travel nut, this is a way to spend your time.
It's useful for Russian separatists with.
It is for that. If they had
air missiles, I guess
they would have known that, that was a commercial.
The amazing thing is when you look at a map of the world on Planefinder, there's a gigantic hole around the Ukraine. Literally, it's like it's a no-fly zone. There are no planes over the Ukraine.
And China. And China.
They may not let it be reported.
Jen, just going back to my pick, can you guess what hotel on the Strip has the best internet?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm going to say the Mandarin Oriental.
No.
I would say it's something a lot cheaper.
It's got to be in City Center. Aria or Cosmopolitan?
Nope, not in City Center. It's
okay,
the
where?
Venetian.
The Venetian, right.
Aria
but then after that, the Signature at MGM Grand and the Four Seasons also have over 20 megabits per second, and then it drops dramatically.
So both of those two, the Signature and the Four Seasons, well, the Signature is a non-casino hotel, and the Four Seasons is a non-casino above Mandalay Bay. So you've got best of both worlds. You've got the casino in reach if you need to.
Mandarin Oriental's on the front page, but it's at like 5 megabits a second.
And the reason why I said that one is because they have a lot of digital devices in their rooms. Like you can do the curtains and all the electronics from, remotely.
Well, they had that also with the Tropicana, and I liked the Tropicana, but not the bandwidth. The bandwidth wasn't great, as I recall.
Tim, you got a pick for us this week.
Yeah, I do. This is a pick, and it's kind of a crusade. I just came from this Adventure Travel Mexico event conference where it came up again that there's this big problem with travelers tossing so much single-use plastic away. So my pick today is a SteriPEN. There's a few different versions, but the one I'm holding up is like the latest one. It uses 4 AA batteries, and it's the cheapest one. I think it's like $59. But the one I use the most is called the SteriPEN Freedom, and it's rechargeable by USB, which is really cool. Oh. And it's very small. It's like, I don't know, if you're on video, it's like less than the size of my hand, very narrow. And basically the way this works is there's a UV wand on the end. You wave it in the water for roughly a minute, and any tap water you put in there is completely sterilized. It doesn't work with muddy river water, but it works with anything clear. And so if you got one of those wide-mouth refillable water bottles of any kind, you can just put this in there, and a minute later you're good to go. And even if you don't want to save Mother Nature, if you spend $2 a day on bottled water, it doesn't take very long to pay for one of these things, and they'll last forever. I mean, even as far as the recharge goes, I can often go for weeks before it needs to be recharged again. And I've used one of these in various forms. I was counting up the other day in 17 countries where you can't drink the water, as well as on a rafting trip in the U.S. And I've never gotten sick, and my daughter hasn't gotten sick, and so I trust it. And I've kept a whole landfill's worth of plastic bottles out of the system, and I haven't added to the Pacific Gyre swirling around that's bigger than Texas. So that's my pick.
We sent my wife's niece off to China with a Camelback All Clear. I don't know if you know that one, but it's basically built into the water bottle itself, where you just press a button at the top of the water bottle, and it has the same sort of thing. It's a UV light.
Yeah, and I just want to say I was plugging SteriPEN there, but there's a lot of other good ones from didnt and Clean Canteen and others where there's some kind of filter built in. And even Vapor, however you say it, those collapsible water bottles, they have one that has a built-in filter where you're sucking through the straw, basically, and it's going through the filter.
Interesting.
And it supposedly kills everything. There's one called a life straw that you can use with muddy water, and you actually stick the thing into the water and suck through it like a straw. And it's good for hikers, backcountry people.
Well, and if you want to see some disgusting videos, just Google that on YouTube, or search for that on YouTube, and you'll see the people showing you drinking water from the muddy streams and things like that.
Yeah.
But that's what it's supposed to be good for.
So, hey guys, we're all going to be at T-Bex Cancun.
Excellent.
We will probably try and do a live show in Cancun, although we haven't talked about the logistics of that.
The logistics are we all sit around a table and talk about travel. I think that's better for when we're done.
I like it when we introduce new bloggers we haven't met before, and people just kind of rotate in and tell us a little bit about themselves.
That requires a little more planning than we have done so far, though. So we'll have to get the word out through the Facebook page if we get our act together there.
I don't think we're going to have a problem finding bloggers who want to talk about themselves.
They're usually so shy, though.
I would just like to ask that the word dolphin and porpoise be left out of the discussion.
Well,
so, Tim,
I, for one, was a little disappointed that they canceled the dolphin barbecue, but yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Why should we not talk about the heir to the French throne?
No, not the dauphin.
Tim, tell us where people can find your book.
Sure. There's a dedicated site for that. It's cheaplivingabroad.com. And I have a couple packages on there. First of all, it's an ebook now in any form, and then there will be a paperback in December. But right now, I'm just selling it directly through that site. And there are two other packages, too, if you want a little more hand-holding, that come with some more goodies and a private Facebook group and some conference calls and webinars and that kind of thing for people that really want to dive into it more. I've got 3 packages called Curious, Committed, and All In, so it kind of depends on where you are in your journey. But that's where you can find me for the book, and also my cheapestdestinationsblog.com is where I'm ranting about something or giving some info twice a week. And I'm Tim Leffel on Twitter, sorry.
Chris, what's new in the Amateur Traveler this week?
We just did a show on the beautiful but tiny country of Luxembourg, which I had a chance to visit for the first time in February, and very, very pretty place. I think one of the prettiest places I've been to in Europe.
I am part Luxembourger.
Are you really part Luxembourg?
I actually am, yes. That's not a joke.
Very cool.
I have descendants from all of the Benelux countries. And I don't think there are many people that can say they are a Benelux American. But me and my brother, I think, are the only ones. And you have what I believe will be one of the greatest episodes of The Amateur Traveler coming soon.
I'm sure that is the case.
A top 10, or at least a top 9.
Yes, Gary was on, and 3 weeks from now he'll be coming on talking about all of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Canada.
Oh.
Jen, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at @JenLeo, and my latest LA Times WebBuzz column was on golfing around the world. You can book golfing trips. You can book your golfing tee times from a website called golfscape.com. And if you are a golfer that likes to practice your sport in other destinations, they've got 47 countries to choose from. So go have fun with that. Book tee time.
We should say, if you are somebody who actually loves golfing, first of all, why? But secondly, there's an opportunity from you if you are also a travel writer, for instance, because I know they're always looking for people. So few travel writers, especially travel bloggers, have any interest in golf. It just tends to be a very different personality for some reason. That there is a real niche out there for somebody who is interested in golf and wants to write about it to go visit some of these places that they're trying to get you there to golf, and a lot of us are just going, just don't care. So.
I'll tell my husband about that, Chris.
Yeah.
And as usual, you can find me at everything-everywhere.com and on Pinterest at pinterest.com/everywheretrip. Can't forget about the Pinterest. Was actually featured on CNN. I've been the beneficiary of a lot of Pinterest affirmative action. There's been several stories about men on Pinterest, and they've used me as they kind of trot me out for that. So definitely want to go to the Pinterest.
It's interesting with Blogger Bridge, as we track the social media habits of thousands of travel bloggers, or thousands of bloggers, but mostly travel bloggers. We can see that there's a steady increase in Google+, there's a steady increase in Facebook and Twitter, but over the last 3 months, both Pinterest and Instagram have doubled.
Oh, Instagram has been the focus of what I've been focusing on the last several months. Mm-hmm. The engagement rates on Instagram crush everything else. Not even close.
Hey, Gary, have you checked out the new Hyperlapse app on Instagram so that you have your phone out and then it speeds it up?
I
haven't used it yet. Yeah.
I tried doing it in my car, doing a brief time-lapse thing, but I never ended up posting it because I just didn't like the quality of it. And that has nothing to do with the app. It was just the fact that the window of my car was dirty, and it was a bad time of day to do it. So anyways, anything else before we sign off? Very well, then. Until the next time we choose to record one of these, and you never know when that might be, get outside and try to go someplace affordable.